You know, there's a song in Hawaii called "The Song of the Islands," and this song gives an identity of a plant or a flower to each of the islands. For the island of Hawaii, the flower, it's the lehua blossom. For Oahu, it's ilima. For Kauai, it's the mokihana berry. And for Niʻihau, it's the pupu, the shell. You know, Niʻihau is very arid. There's hardly any rainfall. You know, its landscape is mainly, you know, red earth, keawe, and cactus. I was talking recently to a young Niʻihau lei maker who spends her summers on Niʻihau, and she told me, she said that there's so many days where there's months almost where there's absolutely no rain, so that when it rains, she said, everybody runs out into the street and screams and yells. They get all of the pots and the pans and they put it out there to collect all the water. And she said they just love the feeling of being soaking wet by the rain. So that goes to show how really dry it is. But anyway, so because it's so dry, and for the people of Niʻihau, the shells are their flowers. I grew up in Kapa and born and raised on Kauai. So are my parents, and on the Hawaiian side of our family, we've been here forever. Growing up in the 50s, I was very fortunate to grow up in a family where many of the Hawaiian traditional practices were part of our everyday life. My father was a fisherman. He also was a fireman. And our yard was, during the summer months and when it was sunny, it was full of dried boxes for drying akule and owama, or whatever kind of fish my father caught, so that he could dry and store for during the other months. My grandmother processed her own lauhala, which she grew in her yard. She wove mats for our house, hats, handbags for us. She made beautiful Hawaiian feather lei for hat bands. She made flower lei, Hawaiian quilts. I mean, she did everything. So I was witness to all of this. I wasn't really impressed when I was very young. It was just part of the everyday life. But my grandmother would sew her own muumuu, and when she and her friends went out, they would wear their muumuu, and the older Hawaiian ladies always wore long strands of white shell, the momi shell. And it would be a long strand that they would wrap several times around their neck. Anyway, like I said, I never paid any attention to it. When I was in high school, my mother asked me if I would like to have a 3-strand pikaki 36-inch Niʻihau lei. And I said to her, Mom, I don't want to look like an old Hawaiian lady. I would like a pearl necklace. Well, I have eaten those words many times over. So anyway, I never paid much attention to Niʻihau lei, but I left Kauai, went to school, traveled, came back. And when I was in my 30s, I got a job working at the Kauai Museum. When I worked there, it was the first time I ever saw a Niʻihau shell lei for sale. And, you know, there was the usual off-white momi, the pikaki style like this. But then it's the first time I ever saw the kahelelani and all the different colors, from the, you know, light pinks to the medium pinks to the dark pinks to the, you know, hot pinks to the burgundies and the reds and the browns and the green tints. I mean, the array of colors was amazing. So I was really, I suddenly became very fascinated with it. People would come to the Kauai Museum and they would place special orders. And the leis were supplied by the school teacher on Niʻihau, and her name was Blossom Kanahele. And she would write letters back and forth with orders, you know, telling how the orders were being filled. And then during the summer, she would arrive with boxes of lei to fill the orders and to also sell at the shop. Well, one of the patrons of the Kauai Museum had ordered a lei, and it was 3.5 years, even before I got there, that they were waiting for this lei. Letters back and forth. How's the lei? How's the order? Oh, still working on it, hard to get the shells. Finally, the lei arrives, and it's this spectacular lei. It's 3 strands of kaha kaha. The color is caramel color with brown stripes, and it's 60, 65, 75 inches long. It is just drop dead gorgeous. And at that point, I was completely seduced and became completely fascinated with Niʻihau lei. And it has been, a passion of mine my entire life now. But anyway, I wanted to order a lei for myself. So I thought, well, I think I'll order this lei. Then I saw another one, and I thought, no, I want this one. So I went to the library, and I thought, well, I need to really research this and find out, all the different types of shells and styles. And really, there was nothing written. The only thing written about Niʻihau was that Niʻihau was famous, it was always famous for its makaloa mats, its decorated gourds, and its Niʻihau shell lei, but nothing else. So I began to get very worried that maybe this was a Hawaiian tradition that would be lost, like, the art of making, Hawaiian feather capes. But then those are environmental issues that have to do with that as well. But also, some of the other fine weaving of ie, makaloa. So anyway, I complained about this for a long time and worried about this. Finally, my husband said to me, you talk about this all the time. Why don't you do something about it? And I said, well, I'm not a writer. And he said, you don't need to write. You need to tell the story. And that's how I began, becoming interested in, writing a book about Niʻihau shell leis. So the first thing I did was do research on the museums that had collections, and also on some of the early voyages. And the oldest documented lei out there was collected by the surgeon on Captain Cook's voyage when they stopped in Niʻihau in 1778. And it was a 10-strand kahelelani, sort of a burgundy red, strung on olona, traditional fiber. Anyway, this is the oldest lei that we know of that something was written about. So besides that, I also the Hawaiian monarchs were very interested in the Niʻihau lei, especially Queen Emma and Queen Kapiolani. They collected lei for themselves. They gave lei for gifts. And they also had formal portraits taken of themselves when they had gone to England to visit Queen Victoria. It was said that when Emma presented herself to Queen Victoria, she had strands and strands of what looked like pearls, but really were Niʻihau shells. Anyway, that was one part of the process. But the most important part was meeting the Niʻihau lei makers themselves. And I had an uncle, my Uncle Benny, was stationed on Niʻihau during World War II. And so we had some family connections of people. They knew us, we knew them. Even if we were from the East Side, we knew some West Side people. So I started meeting the Niʻihau lei makers and interviewing them. I mean, some of the ladies they are no longer with us, but like Lei Pahulehua, Annie Kanahele, Hatsuko Niau. These were the lei makers that I knew back in the 70s and 80s. Today, I know their children and their grandchildren. So I now know 3 generations of lei makers. Anyway, from them, I learned about how and when they collect the different types of shells, how they clean, how they pierce, the different styles. And basically, the shells are really their flowers. A lot of the shell names have to do with either color or names of flowers. And the styles of the lei also reflect flowers, like lei pikake, lei crown flower, lei mauna loa. So the Niʻihau lei makers, one of them, Ani Kanahele, who passed away several years ago, I asked her once, I said, Annie, when you get up in the morning, what do you do? What's the first thing you do? And she said, every day I make shells. She said, I make the pupu. She said, but I get up in the morning and she said, I always say, mahalo ke akua for giving me this gift of the shells. So for them, they're very Christian, and they are always, this is a gift to them, from the akua. I think the most important thing about the Niʻihau Shell Lei is that it is an unbroken tradition from the very beginning that was passed from one generation to another, mother to daughter to, and not only men, there are a few men that also make Niʻihau Lei, but this is a tradition that's unbroken. And secondly, it is a living community. There is the family in which this tradition takes place, is practiced, and then there is also the community that supports that. And I think we who live on Kauai are very fortunate that we can live and actually, bear witness to this community. Like I say, I now know 3 generations of lei makers, and sometimes when I meet a young lei maker, I think to myself, I wonder if this lei maker's great-great-great-great-great-grandmother made that lei that was collected on Cook's voyage in 1778. In closing, I'd like to read you a paragraph, a short paragraph from my book. I published it it came out last year. Today, the shell lei, along with the purity of Niʻihau Olelo Hawaii, is what identifies the people of Niʻihau and sets them apart from other Hawaiians. Niʻihau shell lei evolved from personal and group expressions of aloha to a fine art recognized globally by Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians alike who wear and treasure them. A flower lei is unmistakably Hawaiian. A Niʻihau lei, shell lei, is uniquely Niʻihauan. The artistry of generations of Niʻihau lei makers stems from the strength of the family and community, their deep spiritual beliefs, and the value of the lei. Nowhere else in the world are seashells fastened into garlands that are held in such high esteem. Mahalo, I'm Pau.